Right, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph 31a. So we discussed already with respect to positioning the mezuzah. We discussed already how it should be affixed, vertical, horizontal, or as our custom, hybrid on an angle. We talked about how you determine what's the right side, and there are two considerations: the traffic, what direction the traffic goes from the street towards the inside of the house, and the other consideration is the way in which the door swings, indicating to you what's the inside and what's the outside, thus going on the right side going in. We talked about the Chabad Maneg there. And now we get to the height of the mezuzah, and where to be placed in the height of the door. What's the window in which it has to be, and when it becomes invalid, when it becomes valid. And as well there's a discussion about the Chabad custom, and we'll talk about that as well. So the line begins with the word Rav. There's a little Vav, and then it says Mezuzah, and the third to last word is Amar Rabbi Zera. Yeah, you have it there.
Yeah.
Amar Rabbi Zera is the end of the line.
Okay, which?
It's about a little bit lower than a half. The line begins with the word Rav. There's a small Vav, and at the end of that line is Amar Rabbi Zera.
11 lines from the bottom, if you want to count the lines.
Got it?
Yeah. Okay.
Amar Rabbi Zera. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Amar Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says, Amar Rav Masna, in the name of Rav Masna, Amar Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel. Mitzvah, the mitzvah is Lanicha, to position the mezuzah, Tchilas Shlish Ha'elyon, at the beginning of the top third. Which means, if you divide the door into three sections, then the mezuzah should be positioned right above the second third, or the middle third. Right, so you divide the mezuzah into three sections, right above the middle third, and the top third, but it's the bottom of the top third.
The bottom of the top third.
That's it. Tchilah shlish elyon, the beginning of the top third. So I said right above, if you were to divide the door into three sections, right above the end of the second third, so the beginning of the top third. I should also note, I'll tell you two things actually. Firstly, as we'll see, and it's important to note, Shmuel says, mitzvah lanicha, meaning to say, I think I mentioned this before in the Shulchan Aruch, or in Halacha in general, when it introduces different types of obligations, there's different words it says. Minhag, custom, din, chayav, means obligated, it's a law, it's a custom, and then it says mitzvah. So in a different context, when you're talking about a mitzvah, commandment, versus an aveda versus a sin, a mitzvah is an obligation. In that context, in the biblical context. In a halachic literature context, mitzvah actually doesn't mean that it's invalid if you don't do it that way. It means that this is the prime way of doing it. I think we had such a similar thing before. The point I'm making here is that, as we'll see, it's not as if it's off by half an inch and it's not exactly at that space, it's not valid. It's still valid, and Gemara is going to give us soon bigger windows as to where it should be. But at least we have that this is the mitzvah, this is the best way to do it. The best way to do it is at the bottom of the top third, or another way of saying it, right above the second third from the bottom. Right above the second third. Another thing I want to tell you is there's an app that was developed. It's a Mezuzah app. It's a great app. It's actually a little plug. My brother-in-law's is a cipher. He made this app which has a few functions it does, and one of the things it does is you take a picture of your door. It tells you, there's little frames inside your screen that tell you how to position your camera vis-a-vis your door. Take a picture and it gives you a line telling you exactly where to put your mezuzah. And it's part of a service he provides, in which you can set up a Skype meeting with scholar in this area, and he does a walkthrough of your home and tells you exactly where to put each mezuzah. Because as we're learning, it's not so simple where to put mezuzah. People just assume you put it up on the right side on an angle. But as we're learning, it depends on where the door swings and where the traffic goes and all kinds of details that one can consider. So he has this as an app.
What's the name of the app?
It's Google Mezuzah app. It should be one of the first ones that show up. In addition to that, you can take a picture of your mezuzah, of the actual text, and send it to him. And there are certain things that you'll need to bring the mezuzah in to get checked, but there are certain things, like for example, if it's missing a letter, or if a letter is cracked, that you can see from a picture. So from the picture, he can tell you whether or not your mezuzah, you can get a general feel. He won't tell you kosher, not kosher. If it's not kosher, he can tell you for sure that it's missing a letter, but he can also tell you, like, this is a mezuzah that needs to be checked. Or he can tell you it's a better quality. He can kind of give you an estimate, a roundabout when it comes to that, even though it's not a full checking. So it's an interesting app to have if you're going to go around your home putting up mezuzahs. It's a little plug. Okay, so Shmuel said, Rabbi Zayda, the name of Rabbi Nassim, the name of Shmuel, that the mezuzah, the best case scenario, the mitzvah, is that the mezuzah be positioned at the beginning of the top third. Okay. Rav Huna says, Magbiya min akarka tefach, it has to be above the ground at least one tefach, so one handbreadth above the ground. Yeah? Yeah? Pretty low. U'marchik min akarka tefach. And you have to be below the roof, or the top of the, not the roof, it's the top of the...
Lintel, yeah.
The lintel?
Yeah, lintel.
I was going to say doorpost, but what's it called?
Lintel.
Lintel.
Yeah.
L-I?
I-N-T-E-L.
Interesting. Okay, lintel. So a tefach below that, the chala pesach kuloi, and the entirety of the mezuzah, kosher, the mezuzah is kosher for the mezuzah. So he says it's anywhere in the door, from the bottom tefach to the top tefach. Part of this is going to remain for halacha, part of it's not, as we'll see. But this is Rav Huna's view that the entirety of the mezuzah is the entirety of the mezuzah of the doorpost is kosher for the mezuzah. It just got to be at least below one tefach below the lintel and one tefach above the floor.
Big window.
It's a big window. It's a big it's a lot of leeway. Says the Gemara. Meisvei, the Gemara raises the following challenge. As we've noted here a number of times, the word Meisvei is a challenge from a text greater than the one speaking. So the one speaking here is Rav Huna, as a sage from the Amaraic age, from the Gemara's time, and the Gemara is not going to quote a Mishnaic age text, which reads, Magbiya min akarka tefach, you raise the mezuzah should be raised at least one tefach, one handbreadth from the ground, u'marchik min akarda, and it should be distant from the lintel. Tefach, at least one tefach, one handbreadth, and the entirety of the door in between this tefach on top and tefach on bottom is kosher for the mezuzah. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so this is very easy. This follows the view of Rav Huna. It's very simple. Now the next statement is the problem, or the other view is the problem. Rabbi Yossi says, so this is Rabbi Yehuda's view following Rav Huna, or Rav Huna following Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda predates Rav Huna by a few generations. But Rabbi Yossi says, Ukshartem uksaftem. The verse reads, you shall tie it and you shall write it. This is a common theme throughout the laws of tefillin and mezuzah, as we shall learn throughout the next couple of pages, in that, because the verse compares the writing of the Megillah, the writing of the mezuzah and tefillin, to the positioning of the tefillin, tying it, kshartem, tied on your arm, or on your head actually, as Rashi puts it out, then there are many laws that are derived from each other. There are many similarities between the writing and the positioning. They share a lot of themes. The classic way is that only someone who's obligated to wear it is allowed to write it. So the verse compares the writing to the wearing of tefillin. So the writing of tefillin can only be done by somebody who's obligated in wearing it. In other words, not a woman or not a child, etc.
Even though a woman herself is obligated in mitzvah of mezuzah, but you can't write
because we compare tefillin and mezuzah to each other.
That's right.
But we'll get to that later, God willing. At any rate, the point here is that this is a common theme, that we compare the writing to the positioning of the items, mezuzah, tefillin, whatever it happens to be. So now, in this case, how does it help us here? So mak shira b'goiva, just like when it comes to the binding of the tefillin, it's got to be at a certain height. Rashi seems to have a different version of the Gemara here, which gives a little more elucidation, in that the tefillin has to be put on the head. It's the height of the body. Rashi doesn't mention this, but even the arm tefillin is supposed to be put all the way up at the top of the arm, not at the bottom of the hand. Even though the verse says bind it on your hand. It's not put on your hand, it's put on the upper on the arm. The way Rashi says it, it's on the person's head. But either way, the binding is elevated. So afksiva, so too the writing, that is to say the positioning of that which you are writing, the mezuzah, the goiva should be at a certain height. But it doesn't qualify what that height is. It almost seems to say like the higher the better. So from the Mishnah H text, it would seem two views. One view is you have the leeway between anywhere between the top, anywhere below the top tefach, below the top handbreadth, and the bottom handbreadth, and anywhere between that is okay. It's one view. This is in the Mishnah H text, and the other view seems to say, Rabbi seems to be saying, the higher the better, because the tefillin is at the top of the body, so the mezuzah is got to be top of the door, comparing the writing and the binding. So the question then becomes, this view which says that it should be the top third, where does that come from? This Mishnah H text doesn't seem to support neither of the views in the Mishnah H text seem to support the notion that it should be at the bottom of the top third. Clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. So as the Gemara elucidates, Bishlema, all is settled. It makes perfect sense. Li Rav Huna, if you follow the view of Rav Huna, Huda Amar Rabbi Huda, he follows the view of Rabbi Huda, who predates him. And Rabbi Huda said anywhere between the top tefach and the bottom tefach. But El Shmuel, but rather according to Shmuel, which said that the primary way to do it is at the bottom of the top third, the Amar Kaman, who's he speaking? Who does he follow? Which one of these two Mishnaic texts does he follow? He couldn't be forging his own path in contrast to other Mishnaic texts. If no one in Mishnaic H spoke, then he could say as he wishes, as he sees fit. But here there's precedent, and he has to follow some precedent, or he should. So Kaloik Rabbi Huda doesn't follow Rabbi Huda. Kaloik Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yossi, because he doesn't say the higher the better, nor does he say you have leeway between top and bottom. Clear? Gemara's question. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Huna b'nei Rav Nosson. Rav Huna b'nei son of Rav Nosson answers, La'olam, really, or in reality, I can say, Ki Rabbi Yossi, that Shmuel follows Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi is the one who said that the higher the better. That was the implication, because he compared it to tefillin. Tefillin's at the top of the body, so mezuzah should be at the top as well. So how does it go? So how does it fit? How does it jive with this idea that it has to be at the bottom of the top third? Seemingly the higher is the better. So umay tchila shlish alien, and what does Shmuel mean when he says at the bottom of the top third? Deka amar laharchika. He means to say the lowest you can go. Shalei laharchika manakayr, that it shouldn't be distant from the roof. Shalmaila the top, it shouldn't be distant from the lentil. Yosim shlish, more than a shlish. This little line, which is explanatory, the footnote says was added later, but at any rate, it's there. In other words, what Rav Huna is saying is like this: at the mezuzah should be positioned the higher the better. Now, Rabbi Shmuel is giving us a cap to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said the higher the better. So Shmuel is saying, well, how low is the lowest? This is what Rav Huna, son of Rav Nosson, is explaining. The lowest it can go is to the top of the third, the beginning of the third, or the bottom of the top third. So in other words, the way Rav Huna bar Rav Nosson is explaining to Shmuel is that you have a window. The window is the top third. Anywhere inside the top third is the window. Right? And this is indeed the halacha.
Well, except for that first tefach.
Except for the first tefach, that's correct. So this is indeed... Sorry?
A parameter on each end.
There's still a parameter on top and bottom.
Yeah.
So no lower than the bottom third. No lower than the top third, but no higher than the top tefach. So let's see. That's the yeah. And this is the halacha says the mezuzah should be positioned betchila shlish alien. This is from the Shulchan Aruch Reish Pei Tes Beis. Betchila shlish alien. It should be positioned at the beginning of the top third. Goiva hashar, of the height of the door. Then kaval malam is but if he positioned it above the bottom of the top third, means anywhere inside the top third, ksheda, it's still valid. V'hu, and this is shechikerem mashkif, so long as he's distant from the lintel. I have to get this word straight. Tefach, one tefach. So this is the halacha. So it's interesting to note that even though Shmuel, when he said his statement originally was mitzvah, not an obligation. Mitzvah, it's best to put it in that top third. But now the way the Gemara reframes it, it seems like that's the lowest. In other words, you can't do it under than that. So it seems like if it's too low, it's invalid. But a little higher is still okay. So that's what I was telling you yesterday. You see some of the homes in Hampstead, people put them as very high. And I guess not only in Hampstead, but people put them very high. I don't know why. Maybe they assume it's less noticeable when it's up there. I'm not sure. But it's still valid. It's not perfect, but it's still valid so long as it's not within a handbreadth to the lintel.
I mentioned one too, that I have one. There's one that's high, but the door itself is high too.
Okay, so let's have a look at.
That's okay.
Let's have a look at that.
it's still within that third and
Yeah, so let's have a look at that.
lower than that hand breadth.
Yeah.
Because the door is 8 feet tall or something.
The door is very tall. So let's look at that right now. So now, as it seems at the moment, from our Gemara, it would seem that the height of your door doesn't matter. Yeah. The point is, so long as it's, in other words, it's all relative to the size of your door. You measure it by thirds, and top of the third, and that's it. Doesn't matter. 20 to 30 foot door, then put it up there. It doesn't matter. Right? But let's see the Taisus in the top right. And number Gimel Mebez, 32b, the first Taisus all on the right. So the column on the right side of the right margin. Okay. So he quotes the Gemara, which explains that when Rav Shmuel said that it's got to be the beginning of the top third, he wasn't telling you that's where it has to be, but no higher. He was telling you no lower, but higher than that is okay, right? Giving the window within the top third, so long as it's not within the tefach at the top. So says Taisus in elucidating this Gemara, it shouldn't be lower or more distant from the lintel, from the roof. Now says Taisus, Yerushalmi mashma. Now it's implied from the Yerushalmi, right? From the Jerusalem Talmud, the Perek based the Megillah in chapter 2 of Megillah in the Jerusalem Talmud, that when the door is very tall, manicha, he places it connected to ketefai, he puts it corresponding to his shoulder, the average shoulder. And Taisus concludes that the Gemara there is this, the Yerushalmi is in opposition to our Gemara. It's in dispute. Now we actually mentioned the Taisus this Yerushalmi in the end of last Gemara, yesterday's Gemara, and I said that perhaps it's talking about a synagogue, but it seems I was wrong. It's a universal rule. It's a universal rule in the Yerushalmi's view that it should be opposite, corresponding to the shoulder. Now the dispute between our Gemara and the Yerushalmi, generally speaking, we follow our Gemara. If our Gemara is in conflict with the Jerusalem Talmud, we follow our Gemara. That's generally the rule. Now the thing is, good morning. Now the thing is like this. First of all, there are those that say, there are those who try to reconcile the two and say that the Yerushalmi is not in contrast with our Gemara. And they try to find scenarios in which the Yerushalmi does fit with our Gemara. How is that? So one of the common ways of explaining it is that when the Yerushalmi said that you put it opposite your shoulder, it's talking about a scenario where the Mezuzah, the door, is higher than 20 amos. So there is a law, for example, when it comes to Sukkah and Chanukah. When it comes to Sukkah and Chanukah, both of those are mitzvahs that the Torah implies you have to notice it, you have to be able to see it. Because the pasuk says when it comes to the Sukkah, that your generation should know that you dwelled in tents while you were traveling in the desert or in the clouds of glory. But the point being that the verse implies that when you're sitting in the mezuzah, you should know what the mezuzah is. When you're sitting in the sukkah, you should know what the sukkah is. So the halacha therefore is derived that when you're sitting in the sukkah, your eyes have to be able to catch the roof easily, the sukkah easily. Now the rule is that when you're looking straight, you have peripheral vision, right? Or without being too discomforted, you'll move your eyes up and down without moving your head and looking up like that, just to move your eyes up and down to look, to see. And the rule is that your eyes will catch that which is within 20 amos height.
Like your field of vision.
Your field of vision. Your average, even though you can twist your head to see as high as you like, but your average field of vision is 20 amos high. And therefore, it's one of the reasons why a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 amos, 20 cubits. Because above that is too high for you to notice the sukkah, the schach. Likewise, the menorah. The menorah is all about publicizing the miracle. So if your mezuzah, if your menorah, is at your window, and you're living in an apartment building, and the window is more than 20 cubits from the street, in many views, that's not valid and better put it by the door. Because even if you're not a Chabadnik, even if your custom is to keep it by the window, but if your window is higher than 20 cubits from the street, which means no one's going to notice it, then it's not doing Persuminus, it's not doing publicizing the miracle. And better put it by the door where you're publicizing it for your family. Unless if there's a high-riser. There's a discussion once Jews moved to New York and people lived in high-risers, and now the people across the street can see my mezuzah. my menorah, I'm sorry, because their window is opposite mine. It's a discussion amongst the authorities, is can I rely on other apartments to fulfill the mitzvah of publicizing the miracles? It have to be dafka for the Rosh Hashanah, dafka for the public, for the street. But at any rate, the point I'm making here is that there's a cap to your field of vision of 20 amos. And therefore some might say that when Yerushalmi says to put the mezuzah by your shoulder, that's talking about where otherwise your mezuzah would be 20 amos high, no one would ever see it. So if no one's going to see it, lower it to your shoulder. But if it's not that high in this reading, maybe you should go to a third, even according to the Jerusalem Talmud. This is one way of understanding it. However, the common practice does not follow this reading. The common practice sees it as a dispute. The Bavli, the Jerusalem, our Gemara, and the Jerusalem Talmud is a dispute. And then our Gemara says the mezuzah has got to be a third from the top, regardless of how high the mezuzah is. And the Yerushalmi says it's got to be by your shoulder, regardless of how high the mezuzah, how high the door is. Most people see it as a dispute. And when there's a dispute between the Bavli, our Gemara, and the Yerushalmi Jerusalem Talmud, as I just mentioned, we usually follow our Gemara. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch does. The Shulchan Aruch says to put it up at the third of the top third, and does not, the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, does not distinguish between big doors, small doors, or whatever. It just says put it at the top third, period. However, the Shach, classic commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, Sifsei Kayan, writes, first of all, he notes that under a third it's invalid. As you mentioned, it's not just the mitzvah. It's not just as Shmuel framed it. Mitzvah as in like a best case scenario. It's under that it's actually invalid. Lower than a third, but above that it's okay. It's kosher, as I mentioned. But then he adds that, quoting from other sources, that many say, because of what the Yerushalmi says, that if the door is too high, put it at your shoulder height. So it's interesting. The Shach is learning that it's a dispute between our Gemara and the Yerushalmi. That it's an actual dispute as to how high the mezuzah should be, at your shoulder height or top third. And yet he rules in favor of the Jerusalem Talmud, not in favor of our Gemara, which is unique. But that's what he says. And indeed, there are many other halakhic authorities which go on the side of the Shach here. And that's become a very common practice, custom. And the same thing is true of our mezuzahs downstairs here. Go to the social hall, go to the shul, the doors are very tall, but the mezuzah is shoulder height, following this Shach.
What's the many people tend to touch the mezuzah when they walk, so that may be a consideration as well.
Might be a consideration, but if it's in other words, if it's,
I mean,
you have to remember, that's true. That's a custom. I don't know. That's an obligation. In other words, it's a nice thing, but it's not an obligation. But you have to remember this: if you're following our Gemara, then lower than a third is invalid. So you're not going to have an invalid mezuzah just for the sake of your convenience of touching it, right? Which means you have to have very broad shoulders to say, make your mezuzah lower, siding with the Jerusalem Talmud over our Gemara. And the Shach and others do have those broad shoulders, and then indeed that's the case. And many do that, including our Chabad right here. We have mezuzahs that are lower than a third, following the Shach, the shoulders, because this is indeed a common practice. Now when it comes to Chabad Minhag, there's the following. So there's a fantastic book I have here called Shulchan Menachem. And Shulchan Menachem is, the Rebbe never wrote halachic works, but they collected from all the Rebbe's writings and talks and interactions and letters, any time that the Rebbe writes something related to halacha, and compiled it in accordance to the Shulchan Aruch, and it's come to, I think, 7 or 8 volumes. So it's quite extensive. And it's not the first time they collected such a thing, but this is the first time that they reworked it with footnotes and sources and everything else. So it's
that's a recent publication.
It's within the last 5 years for sure. Yeah, Ayin Hay. It's a few years ago. It's a beautiful work. I had the original one, which was just a collection without the sources. When this came out, I bought this one. I mean, this is a real work. That scholars must have gone through this and put footnotes and sources to everything. So here they quote an incident like this. Here they write the following. So in Tafshin Vav, what year is that? That's 46, 47. Before the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Rebbe was the chief editor of Kahas. Kahas is the publishing arm of Chabad. Now at the time, the Rebbe was, besides for going through old manuscripts of Hasidic writing in Hebrew and publishing them, the Rebbe also was very involved in publishing Torah in English as part of his outreach effort. and making halacha and chassidus and Torah and everything available in English. And the Rebbe had writers who did it with him, and the Rebbe edited these things. So in English, there is a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch L'Noya. That's an abbreviated version of the Shulchan Aruch, which means a condensed version of Jewish law in English for youth. So it's even like more condensed than the condensed Shulchan Aruch. It's a very, very basic, just very basic stuff of what to do. And it's written in English for youth. It's meant for the modern American kid who just learns English, doesn't know how to open up a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and find the law. So here he can find the law in English. And there, they actually found, Rabbi Raskin here writes that it's actually in Rebbe's handwriting. But Rebbe writes, to follow the shach. Oh, it doesn't say it's in Rebbe's handwriting. But anyway, Rebbe edited that book. And there, it says to follow the shach, that the mezuzah should be at the height of your shoulder. And that's become the Chabad custom because of that. However, and this is something that's a matter of discussion amongst Chabad Rabbanim until today. What I'm reading from here, by the way, is from Rabbi Raskin. Rabbi Raskin's a dayan in London. He wrote a book called Nesidim B'Sdei HaShlichus, which is kind of like a halachic manual for different questions that arise when a person is in their Chabad house or in Shlichus. And there he has a section in the back and detailing this law about how high the mezuzah should be. And there he quotes this condensed version of Jewish law in English that they were edited, in which it says to follow the shach, that we put the mezuzahs at the height of the shoulder, following the Yerushalmi, following our Taisvus, right? And then he writes like this, that Rabbi Yaakov Landa, who is the former chief rabbi of Bnei Brak, his son Rabbi Moshe Landa took his place. Rabbi Yaakov Landa, as a child, as a young man, was involved in halacha in the Rebbe Rashab's home, in the home of the fifth Chabad Rebbe. So many of the Chabad traditions in halacha come through him, and Rebbe used to communicate with him about this. For example, the previous thing we talked about last week, about the way the doors swing and the Chabad custom, that tradition comes from him. Rebbe communicated with Rabbi Landa about that tradition, because he was in Lubavitch, he was in the old country, watching the way the previous Chabad Rebbe actually conducted themselves. So he's like a link in bringing the Chabad tradition over in halacha. So there he writes that in the Rebbe Rashav's home in Rostov was a city that they, after the revolution, it seems, they were kicked out of the town of Lubavitch. They moved to a city called Rostov, and the Rebbe Rashav set up court there, including a yeshiva. And there he says the mezuzahs were, even though the doors were very tall, the mezuzahs were at the top third, not shoulder height. Not shoulder height, following our Gemara rather than the Yerushalmi, following the Shulchan Aruch rather than the Shach. Yeah. And indeed, recently, since you're able to go back into Russia, they went to examine these homes, and they peeled a couple layers of paint back, and they found the holes where the mezuzah was, and they measured it, and it's a third, rather than shoulder height. So on the one hand, you have the Rebbe saying, in 1947, in his English manual that you done with the Shach, at shoulder height. On the other hand, you have this testimony from the Rebbe Rashab, and evidence that the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, had it at the third, not at the shoulder height. So what do you do? So again, as I said, this is a matter of discussion till this very day. And there are those that suggest, including it seems like Rabbi Raskin here suggests, that it's possible that at the time of the Rebbe writing that manual, 1946, he hadn't heard the testimony yet from Rabbi Landa. So he hadn't known necessarily what that was. On the other hand, the previous Rebbe was alive in 1946 when he wrote this. And the previous Rebbe was in Rostov and would have seen that mezuzah. So it's likely the Rebbe could have communicated with that, or asked, or the Rebbe would have commented.
But
so it's like,
where were his mezuzah?
The Rebbe's?
The previous Rebbe's, to get some.
I don't know that the 770 had doors that tall.
High enough to really.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it had.
Right.
It's a unique scenario. You have to have doors tall enough to be able to note. Otherwise, you have no.
Right.
So when it comes to the swinging of the door, the previous Rebbe's balcony, as I mentioned, has a door going inward, and we can see testimony that Friedrich Rebbe kept that tradition. Previous Rebbe kept the tradition, even in 770 New York. But I don't think there are doors that tall in 770. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know every door. But at any rate, so there's a kind of conflict here. People don't really know what the common practice is. And likewise, there's even a further discussion, which he gets into a little bit in a footnote here, is what the law is when a latter commentary writes something in contradiction to something of a previous generation, but the latter commentary who wrote that thing didn't have the original text. What do? Do you say that the writer, let's say the Shulchan Aruch, didn't have a certain response from a certain, or had a missed, which is true in some cases. The Beis Yosef had a wrong version of the Rambam's Code of Jewish Law. And then later we find out that the original version had it differently. Do you now modify the Code of Jewish Law's view and say that the Code of Jewish Law was following the Rambam? And now that we know that the Rambam is otherwise, do we switch?
I think you would.
Well, it depends. You might say that the Beis Yosef came to his own conclusion. The Shulchan Aruch came to his own conclusion. And he happened to have the Rambam as support. In other words, he understood the text the same way the Rambam did in his mistaken view. So which means maybe the Rambam came to a different conclusion, but doesn't change the fact that he came to his conclusion that way. So you never really know. So this is a big discussion, and it's a wide-ranging discussion. There's a shach about it, and there's other places. It's a wide-ranging discussion, and he puts here in the footnotes that you should know that everyone spoke about it, and the Rebbe is of the view that you stick to what the latter commentary said. He writes this here, that in Mem Zayin, in 87, the Rebbe spoke about this. Not about the Mezuzah, but the Rebbe spoke about this idea that even though in later generations you discover new versions of earlier texts, you still stick to that which the Code of Jewish Law came to, because he used his Torah logic and knowledge to come to those conclusions. Even if this previous generation came to a different conclusion, doesn't mean that his view is invalid. Right? So if that's the case, maybe you would say, even if the Rebbe hadn't seen, or did see, either way, what the Rebbe Shab did, he wrote to go follow the Shach because this is the way he understood the conclusion should be, then perhaps this should be the Chabad custom. This is a very strong argument, which many follow, and clearly here as well, because our mezuzahs here are also shoulder height. But again, here at least you see that even it's a controversy in halacha. It's a Bavli, it's a Jerusalem Talmud, our Gemara versus the Yerushalmi, the Shulchan Aruch versus the Shach, and then even within the Chabad custom, I don't want to say verses, but you have the Rebbe Shab's practice on the one hand, and the Rebbe's writing on the other hand, and it's still a discussion amongst Chabad Rabbanim until today exactly how to follow.
There seems to be a big jump with the Shach, how he came to side with the Yerushalmis.
Yeah, why the Shach came to the Yerushalmi against our Gemara.
Right.
So he says that he quotes a few sources as to why he does that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he quotes the Beis Yosef and the Bach. At any rate, so now you have a little more controversy with respect to the height of the mezuzah. But at any rate, we do come to the following, at least as far as halacha goes, for the common halacha, because I don't know how many people have doors that are so tall, but at least we know the following. If you have a normal sized door, under a third, invalid. Over a third, don't make anybody crazy, don't make them undo the mezuzah and make it lower, because there's no reason to. So long as it's a handbreadth from the top. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody.